Hi there, welcome to a special Friday edition of Indycar. I'm Gordon Ross, and today I wanted to talk about defence and NATO in particular. Over the next few weeks, NATO chiefs will be meeting here, both in London and with Donald Trump. It's going to coincide with Donald Trump's visit to the UK around about the 11th, between the 11th and the 13th of July. Now, the reason I wanted to talk about NATO is twofold. We're hearing an awful lot of sabre rattling coming out from the UK's Ministry of Defence. And if you watch the BBC News in particular, you hear nothing but this constant referral to some kind of Russian threat. And this Russian threat is never really specified, but the rhetoric coming out of the Ministry of Defence this week has actually explicitly said Russia is preparing for war. Now this is a very serious ratcheting up of the sabre rattling. It's something which should concern everybody, because we've heard constant referrals to Russian aggression, Russian this, Russian that, Russian interference on the internet. Theresa May had a meeting with her her Minister for Defence. I think it's Gavin Williamson, somebody can correct me if I've got the name wrong. But in that meeting, she told him that it was essential that Britain maintains its Tier 1, as she calls it, Tier 1 defence posture. Now that means that she wants Britain to maintain its status as a major player in the military world. In other words, she wants us to be acting in the same way as America, and possibly in the same way as Russia, I guess, as well, in being a major player. Now, as you know, the West, as it is, Western Europe, the United States, Britain, and a lot of other countries are in an alliance called NATO. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization is set up after World War II to protect the Western capitalist system from any encroachment by the communist Soviet Union, as it then was, what we now know as Russia, after the Soviet Union has broken up. But now that the world's economy is in bits because the experiment of globalization has now run its course and there's no more growth to be had, governments around the West are looking for ways to restart and to rejig their economies. One of the favourite methods, especially in the 20th century when things were going badly and it looked like there would be a depression or a recession, was to have a really good war so that they could ramp up spending on things like weapons and planes and tanks and boats and ships, and have the whole country's economy running at full blast, in the meantime having a massive war to destroy as much property as possible, so they can then regenerate the damaged cities and the destroyed towns with yet more investment and more money moving around. Now this has happened periodically throughout the 20th century. Two major world wars, the Korean War, the Vietnam War. They've had the war in the Balkans, we've had umpteen wars in the Middle East. All of these are fueling the arms manufacturing business, which Britain is second in the world in, by the way. So what we do know is that Britain blames Russia for things like the Brexit vote. It's claiming that Russia somehow managed to infiltrate the internet and somehow magically influence the vote so that we had Brexit. And they're now worried about Cybermen. These are the supposed Russian cybernats, cyber whatever you want to call them, who are meddling with the internet and messing with our minds and trying to convince us that Britain's a rubbish place to live and we should all do something else. Now, we don't need the Russians to tell us that Britain is a rubbish place and we should do something else. We know that anyway. But the point is, worrying things are happening. Stoltenberg, who is the chief of the NATO alliance, he's the head of it. Stoltenberg is worried because of the 27 NATO states which form the NATO alliance, only 5, including the US and the United Kingdom, actually spends 2% of their gross domestic product or more on defence and defence procurement, so buying planes and tanks and guns and missiles and submarines and whatever military hardware. We in the United States and 2 or 3 others are the only ones who are pulling our weight in NATO. The rest are sitting back on the sidelines, not wanting to get involved, and perhaps rightly so, because they don't perceive any threats. On the Russian side of the border this week, Vladimir Putin has told his generals to form what he calls a symmetrical response to the massive build-up of Western military equipment on his western border. So who is actually threatening war here and who is not? It's hard to say. It seems like the West is pushing a military build-up along the western edge of the Russian border. In a way, it's very similar to what happened before World War I, where two sides gradually had an arms race and built up more and more and more weapons until there was a face-off, and they had to decide who was going to win that face-off. So we're entering not a nuclear arms race, but a conventional arms race at the moment, and the only ending result for something like that is a war, and a war on European soil. And it would be a war involving superpowers, America, Russia, Britain hanging on the coattails of the United States. It's very worrying that Britain values defence spending far above any spending on the NHS, and is quite happy to force austerity on the entire population in order to spend 2% or more of our GDP on weapons that we're never going to use. For example, Trident. Trident, as you know, is a nuclear missile system which belongs to the United States. We're not even buying it, we're just literally renting it from the USA. And Britain's the only part of the Trident system which Britain makes is the submarine that carries the missiles. Britain isn't even allowed to fire these missiles without the say-so of the USA. What I'm coming to today is the fact that despite Brexit, despite chaos all across the UK, the British government is now making warlike noises and threatening some kind of military action along the western edge of Russia. The Russians are responding in kind with a symmetrical response. Equal numbers of tanks, planes, infantry, missile launchers and all the rest of it, all ranged along the western border with Russia. So we're talking Germany's eastern border with Russia. But why? What's the point of this? The point of it is that the system which governs global trade has stopped working. There aren't any more people left to exploit. If we go for one more spurt of growth in the global economy, we will have used up every single resource the planet has, and we'll have exploited everybody on the planet. Now the problem is, as you know, with globalization, jobs went to places like China, they went to Korea, they went to India, places which are developing. As they get wealthier, the people who work in those industries there that supply us with all these cheap goods, they start to want more money. And as their wages go up, so the prices for us begin to rise, and the economy begins to stall because we stop buying those expensive goods, and these companies in the so-called cheaper areas like China and the Far East, they start to lose orders and their economies stop working. And this is what has happened to China. China's economy has virtually stopped growing. It used to grow in something like 20% a year. It was a massive, massive growth in China, unbelievable amounts of growth. But now they've got too much stuff, too much steel, too much aluminium. The Chinese don't know what to do with it. The West is no longer able to send all of its garbage to China to be recycled because China has too much garbage to recycle. The world economy is stopping, and as it stops, the Western governments, the Western Alliance is plotting ways to have some kind of a war to get the economies of their countries going again. And this has happened throughout history, time upon number. Whenever things go badly for the free market economy, there is some kind of big conflict which is used to kickstart the global arms trade and to keep the factories running. It's a dangerous time for us. Brexit is coming, and on the 28th of this month, the UK has to convince Europe that it has a workable solution to the Irish border problem. It has a workable solution to the EU citizens living in the UK. Now, it's already said that it will give EU citizens the opportunity to apply to stay in the UK by paying a fee of £65 just to stay where they are, as long as they answer 3 questions. Now, 3 questions and £65, and they don't even know if they'll be allowed to stay, is not a solution to the problem. It's just saying, we're going to give you the chance. It's like a lottery. Pick a ticket and you might win your chance to live in the UK. That's not a solution to the EU workers' problems here. And the third issue, which is never talked about, is Gibraltar. The Rock of Gibraltar, which is a British military outpost, won from the Spanish about 300 something years ago, never given back. The Spanish have claimed sovereignty over that rock ever since Britain won it in war. What is going to happen to Gibraltar? It is also part of the European deal, and on the 28th of this month, Britain has to say what it's going to do about it. And so far we've heard absolutely nothing about that. On the 28th, if Britain does not satisfy all 3 of these conditions, to the satisfaction of the European Union's 27 member states, then the transition period which has been offered by the European Union to us, for us to smoothly leave the EU and gradually go our own way, that 2-year period will be withdrawn. So on the 28th, if we don't get this right, it will be a very sudden shock exit. It doesn't matter whether it's a hard or a soft Brexit, it will be abrupt cliff edge Brexit on the 29th of March if they don't get this right. Later this summer, the British government has to produce a white paper which outlines everything that it's going to do in Brexit, how it's going to do it, and what it is going to ask the European Union for in its negotiations in broad terms. So then we will know what the British government hopes to achieve. But all it can achieve, given the red lines that it has already painted on the ground, is at best a very hard Brexit, and at worst a no-deal Brexit, where we crash out of the European Union alone, with no trade deals done, with no way of trading with the European Union, no way of flying aircraft in and out of the European Union, no way of importing and exporting and paying the taxes and tariffs that will apply through the EU, no way of driving in the EU, no way of going on holiday. We'll have to arrange visas. There's going to be chaos at the airports, chaos at the seaports. The road network will gum up. The pound is going to plummet no matter what happens on the 29th. And the government has got a mountain to climb, but virtually a vertical cliff to climb before then, before anything happens. And it could be that all this distraction of threatening war with Russia is another one of these things that they do when they're in trouble. Margaret Thatcher basically allowed the Falkland Islands to be invaded so that she could have a wee war in the middle of a great period of Tory unpopularity in 1982. When she won that little war, because it was a little war, but hundreds, in fact thousands of people died on both sides in that battle for those islands. When that was over, Thatcher was made. She was the queen of the country, that she could do no wrong. For years and years, her second term, she was all powerful. And this, I think, is what the Tories are planning at the moment. Some kind of sideshow to distract us all from the catastrophe of Brexit that they've made. They won't say, and they won't tell us anything about what they're planning to do. But from the Scottish angle, now independence isn't so much looking like a leap in the dark, it's looking like a security and safety blanket. It's no longer a case of us trying to persuade people to vote for independence. It's trying to deal with the huge numbers of people who are coming over to vote for independence now. When a newspaper like The Scotsman publishes a poll recently which shows that although the yes and no voters are still roughly the same numbers as they were in 2014, all of the undecided voters have now said they are more likely to vote for independence, and that's about 34% of the population, added on to the existing 30 or so percent of the population who are solid yes voters. We are talking over 60% of Scottish citizens now seriously wanting independence. And we haven't even had a campaign yet. Brexit is a... what is it? It's like a wedge. It's prizing the UK apart. It's separating the interests of England and Scotland into two pieces. England wants to go its own way. They want to shut their doors to immigration because they feel they have too much unrestricted immigration. That's fine for them. Scotland, on the other hand, we have different issues. We have an active exporting economy. We must protect it. The only way we can do so is if we are allowed, or if we are given the opportunity to become a normal country again and not a slave nation to some other state, which is the most peculiar place for any country to ever be. Scotland becomes normal again, can make its own decisions. We can draw up our own deals with the European Union. It doesn't matter whether we're in it or not, we can trade with them and we don't have any red lines. The only safe place for anybody in business in Scotland is if we become a separate state again, if we escape from the Union and end it and become Scotland again. Look at what has happened this week with Airbus Industries. Airbus Industries employs thousands of people across the UK building the wings for their airliners. Parts come from all over Europe to be assembled and built into these complicated wings with all these flaps and different controls and engine mounts. It's a very sophisticated industry. And their boss is saying that if they don't get some clarity soon, those wings will be made elsewhere in Europe. That factory will close, thousands of people will become redundant. And this is the real Brexit dividend. The dividend is unemployment. The dividend is going to be redundancy payments. That's the Brexit dividend. There isn't a positive to Brexit. Nothing about it is positive, other than the fact that you can make your own decisions, England. But if you're going to make your own decisions, then we'll make ours as well. But they're not going to be the same as yours. And we're not going to be dragged into another war because England's economy is crashing or because its currency has crashed. And this is the whole reason why Scotland needs a new currency. And it's the reason why it needs to go back to being a country again and not being part of the UK. Just as England wanted to get control back from Europe, we want to get control back from the UK. We need it. We need to protect our industries. We need to protect the Europeans who work here, who've chosen to become Scots and live and work here, and all the other people who've migrated to Scotland who choose to be Scots. Being Scottish is not something that is an accident of birth. Being Scottish is a choice that people make to come and live here and accept and adopt the way we live and the way we do things and the values that we hold dear. We are a more socialist country than England. That's just a fact. We are more left-leaning, we are more progressive, we're not dictatorial, we're not right-wing. We're much more progressive and left of centre, and people like that. Most of the English people, in fact all of the English people I've met who come to live here are pro-independence. I don't think I've met a single one of them who actually wants to go back to England and wants to be ruled by the Tories. They're coming here because it's nicer. Let's just make sure that we separate ourselves from the UK. Let England do what it wants, let it have a war if it wants, but let us stay away from that. We have no issues with anybody else. We have no issues with Russia. We have no issues with Iran. We're quite happy where we are. We see no reason to get involved in these things. Okay, that was a bit of a long rant today, and I'm sorry, I'm making up for a couple of days where I haven't been able to broadcast, but I thought it was important to talk about this today. The British government is seriously thinking of gearing up for a war. They're definitely gearing up for a cyber war. Theresa May has told her Defence Secretary that she wants to strengthen up the cyber warfare department of the British Defence system. She wants to spend more money, and she wants them to modernise and make the Ministry of Defence relevant and make their strategy relevant to today's realities. I don't know if they'll manage that, but it seems to me that if they're planning to go to war with America against Russia, then it's all talk. That this business of cyber warfare is just that, it's just propaganda. Anyway, I'm off. I have to go do some actual work now. But tune in again maybe on Sunday. I should have something more to tell you then. There are some interesting developments coming up, and I'm keeping my finger on the pulse at the moment to see how they develop. But as usual, if you want to contact me, you know where I am. Make a comment on this blog, or if you want to, you can contact me by messenger in private. Thanks for your time today. I'll talk to you on Sunday. Bye bye for now.